If there is one rule that decides who wins in Clash Royale, it is versatility. It's not always about damage or flashy abilities, but cards that always seem to fit. No matter the deck, the arena, or the matchup. Versatile cards are the glue of Clash Royale, but Musketeer stands out because she defends, counters, and supports across many matchups, unlike more specialized cards. When things go wrong, these are the cards you fall back on. When things go right, they're already there, doing their job, and that's precisely where the Musketeer stands, showcasing the importance of making players feel appreciated for recognizing her value in the game. For just 4 elixir, she doesn't demand a deck built around her. She fits into almost every deck. She's never the star or the win condition, but she's almost always the reason the win condition works. We will also talk about the funny deck soon enough. But today we're breaking down why versatility is one of the most potent traits a card can have in Clash Royale, and why the Musketeer might be one of the best examples of that design ever put into the arena. Even to this day, she remains one of the most important cards in the game, and one of the most broken too. She's excellent at shooting down dragons, popping balloons, damaging beefy damage dealers. She's a sniper. She now spawns a mini turret. Heck, there's even 3 of them in one for triple the damage. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves for now. Let's go back and start with the ancient times, when Clash Royale was still in its cradle, unaware of the nightmares that it would face in the future. So, it's 2016, and you just recently downloaded Clash Royale, the game you've been hearing about on the web. You enter the game, and you're instantly put into tutorial battles where you get to use the first basic cards of the game. Soon enough, after finishing that first tutorial battle, you get a wooden chest which has the Musketeer in it, a versatile high DPS that you find out quickly goes well with the giant as your win condition. Really takes you back, doesn't it? The game was that simple at that time. All you had to do was worry about placing down your main win condition with some support card behind it to push through the opponent's defenses. And Musketeer was really good at that. Now, obviously showing you the usage rates at that time would be useless because the game wasn't even a month old, and there were as many people playing it as the population of the Vatican. But as the game went viral and more people started playing, her usage rate rose steadily. To make her more appealing, they gave her a balance change on the 9th of February where they reduced her elixir cost from 5 to 4. Yeah, her elixir was way more expensive at first, but to compensate, they reduced her damage by 25%, which was changed again 10 days later, increasing it by 11%. The following and last balance change she got was again 10 days later. Just before the game's global release, they decreased her range from 6.5 tiles down to 5, balancing her out just a bit more. Her popularity was increasing every week as players got more familiar with the game and formed decks where the Musketeer was often a great filler card, even besting the cannon. There was a lot of stuff people liked about her. She could take out a balloon alone if positioned right, put up a good fight with the baby dragon, the Valkyrie, and even survive a fireball 1 level lower than her. You could never go wrong with her as long as you used her right. Aside from her working well with Giant, she also got a role in one of the most popular and controversial decks in the history of Clash Royale. The deck which is still alive even today, and the deck you've been wanting me to talk about ever since you saw this title, Hog 2.6, formerly known as the Hog Trifecta deck. Hog Rider has always been one of the best and oldest archetypes in the game, and the Hog Trifecta was the earliest form of its cycle. Interestingly, only 5 cards of the Hog 2.6 were in the game: Hog Rider, duh, Musketeer, Valkyrie, Skeletons, Fireball, and Cannon. The Log, Ice Golem, and the Ice Spirit were not in the game back then, but the existing cards worked exceptionally well together. Hog Rider, Musketeer, and Valkyrie made the deck into a trifecta. Any deck that had these 3 cards was a Hog Trifecta, and naturally players created a lot of different decks around them. This one with the Elixir Collector is assumed to be the original. So what made this deck so unique at the time? Well, aside from being stronger than even today, this archetype was distinctive from what players were used to in the game. Most decks always relied on a beefy win condition, usually Giant, while building up a big push. But Hog Rider defied that rule and promoted a much more active and cyclable playstyle, which a lot of people liked. Hog Rider and Musketeer's usage rates were both above 30% for June of 2016, making them top 10 in the entire game, which only increased as time went on because in July, Supercell released 2 cards that changed Clash Royale forever: Ice Spirit and Log. Now, I don't need to tell you much about Log, but it was another card to combat the usage of Zap, and to serve as the arch-nemesis of the princess. Still, it was horrible when it first came out, so that's why we'll move on to the Ice Spirit, which not only synergized with the deck, but especially the Lone Musketeer. Firstly, it cost 1 elixir, making it easily cyclable. Secondly, it was just what the Musketeer needed to handle beefier cards, which she couldn't before. Ice Spirit froze the enemy troops for just the right amount of time for the Musketeer to gun them down. For example, she couldn't handle the barbarians on her own, but with the help of an Ice Spirit and the Princess Tower, she could take all of them down without a single damage to the tower. She could even take out an entire minion horde on her own if both cards were played right. This wasn't only great for defense, but excellent as a counterattack. Which reminds me of the Wizard, you know, that blue-coated magician guy with the cool hair and beard. Yeah, him. People were actually using him back then, and players couldn't really decide whether to go with him or the Musketeer because of the AoE. Musketeer and Wizard both had similar hit points, but Musketeer was quicker, had bigger range, and dealt more DPS while costing 1 less elixir. But she was only single target rather than AoE like the Wizard. Consensus on which card was better was whatever you were facing the most. If you were in matchups with a lot of baby dragons and single beefy cards, then Musketeer was the best choice. Or if you were against spammy cards, Wizard was the best choice. Or, you know, Ice Spirit and Musketeer, which had much more value. And then there's also the 3 Musketeers. They really didn't have a good start. Back then, the community feelings on 3 Musketeers were a total roller coaster. On paper, they were a buy 2, get 1 free sale, getting 12 elixir worth of firepower for only 10, and then for 9. But in reality, it was like walking around with a giant target on your back. Half the player base thought they were a joke because a single 4 elixir fireball could practically wipe out your entire 9 elixir investment, leaving you broke and defenseless. The other half, mostly the pro-level pump players, swore they were the best win condition in the game if you could just bait out the opponent's big spell first. What's even crazier is that for a long time, the split lane strategy we see today wasn't actually common practice. Instead of splitting them behind the King Tower to force an opponent to pick a side, many players would just drop all 3 together for a massive all-in push. It was a spectacular sight when it worked, but it also meant a single poison or rocket could end the game right then and there. This go big or go home playstyle made them feel incredibly niche and kept their usage rates low for anyone who didn't want to risk a 10 or 9 elixir disaster. However, the playstyles of both the Lone Musketeer and 3 Musketeers are very different, so we won't be focusing on 3 Musketeers as much as the Lone Muskie, but we will point out a thing or two whenever they come up. After a few balance changes, 3 Musketeers did find their way back into the meta, especially in this minor deck, which contained the most used cards in the meta of June of 2016. But that spot was taken by the single Musketeer soon enough, which proved to be more efficient and cheaper. Musketeer had over 50% usage in August, which sounds extremely crazy today. However, considering how many cards there were back then and how popular the game was, it can still be regarded as usual, although a bit too much. But her popularity didn't last long after Mega Minion was released, which was basically a flying mini P.E.K.K.A, which was way better than a lot of other cards. And guards were used a lot more because of the popular double prince meta. Musketeer's usage dropped over time, and for October she was already at 16%, a massive drop from 52%. The same happened to 3 Musketeers as the Elixir Pump's elixir cost rose to 6 elixir from 5, which made playing those decks even more risky. The beefier options in Bowler and Prince cost just 1 more elixir, but present a much more substantial threat, especially when protected by a giant. The decks where Musketeer shone before switched her out with these new decks, and soon enough, Mega Minion became the fan-favorite damage troop that replaced Musketeer, and also the mini P.E.K.K.A at that. Mega Minion was a massive game-changer for its time. The giant beatdown deck's Musketeer played a key role in taking a different turn where the Prince became the essential troop of the giant, while Mega Minion provided support from the air. More cards started showing up in decks like Lightning, which was easily one of the best ways to deal with Musketeer. It was even better against the three musketeers. The elixir value was just too good to pass up. Woody, who was basically the GOAT of stats before Royal API existed, pointed out that the meta was shifting. He mentioned that glass cannons like the Musketeer and Mini P.E.K.K.A. were starting to struggle because there were so many other high damage options available. The decks listed below did not even contain a single Musketeer, but instead Mega Minion. Clearly the meta was changing because players started moving away from versatile high DPS troops like Musketeer, Mini P.E.K.K.A. or Baby Dragon in favor of more specialized troops. Miner, Giant, and Hog Rider were the three offensive troops during November of 2016, along with Fireball and Graveyard rising in popularity, enough for Bowler and Princess to return. While this had a negative effect on the aforementioned cards, Musketeer saw a 9% usage this month, and three Musketeers were doing even worse with 4%. This is because the changes were affecting the elixir pump, which was the cornerstone of almost every heavy beatdown deck. Playing three muskies without the pump was a massive gamble, almost guaranteeing you to be at an elixir disadvantage if not played just right. But things got better a year later, as the meta changed once again. Musketeer's usage rate jumped back up to 28%, and this comeback was mostly thanks to the sudden disappearance of Lightning. For a long time, Lightning was the go-to spell for deleting mid-health troops, but as players swapped it out for Fireball and Zap, Musketeer finally had room to breathe, even though Fireball was still a big threat to her. She became the perfect response to the elite barbarian craze. While common cheap counters like archers were getting one-shotted by the buffed barbs, the Musketeer had the range to kite them and the health to survive a stray zap. This created a cycle where she could defend a lane, survive the opponent's spells, and then immediately turn into a dangerous counterattack behind an Ice Golem or Giant. While Mega Minion and these 7 other cards were all the heat, at least Musketeer had a chance to show up again. Things would get better for the good old Muskie next year, but before you get to that, if you're finding this video interesting, make sure to scroll on down and hit that sub button. It really helps a ton, and any type of support is always appreciated, so thank you. 2017 started off big with Mega Minion, Lightning, and Fireball dropping immensely in usage rates, giving Musketeers a big chance to reappear again. And reappear she did with a staggering 37% usage rate. To a lot of players, this was a surprise due to Graveyard being around, but people started using more Air and Hog decks, most likely due to various balance changes, and a lot of versatile cards like Archers or Minions weren't used as much as before, but now they had an opportunity again to shine. Musketeer is a great counter to the big, scary balloon, so you bet she was a popular option again. Musketeer brought back the OG trifecta to life with not 1, but 3, sometimes up to 4 Musketeers. Though it's important to note that many new trifecta decks had a new best pal replace the old Ice Golem, who replaced Valkyrie, essentially killing her for quite a while. Calling 4 Musketeer decks top-tier competitive would be a lie, but it was surprisingly decent. There were more than one variation of this style, like Giant 4 Musketeer Beatdown, which was just 3 Musketeers plus a single Musketeer, the Elixir Collector, obviously, and filler like Skeletons, Zap, and Miner for chip damage. Back then, Zap and Ice Golem were way stronger than they are now, so the deck actually worked. Some decks also contained Elite Barbarians because they were stupidly overpowered and used everywhere. You could defend pretty well and put a ton of pressure on, but it was just so risky. It was a troll deck at most. Some players would even add a mirror to it though, and most players ended up sticking to more reliable meta decks instead, rightfully so. The 4 Musketeer decks wouldn't even live for long because the cards were nerfed. For example, Hog Rider decks. You had Hog Rider Control, Hog Freeze Beatdown, Giant Hog Rider Cycle, and a lot more variations of it. Musketeer was on a massive upward trend, peaking at over 57% usage in the top 100 by January of 2017, but that momentum hit a wall when the Executioner was released. To be fair, Executioner was completely broken at launch, so a lot of the decks we talked about started swapping Musketeer out for him, since he just did the same job, but better. Even though he was the objectively stronger pick at the time, it wasn't a total death sentence. Musketeer still managed to stay relevant and didn't fall back into being a useless card. The meta shifted again right after when a major balance change nerfed the Executioner's bugs and damage. Because Executioner wasn't as dominant, players went back to the Musketeer for her consistent single-target DPS. At the same time, Lightning started to lose its spot to a newly buffed Poison spell, and since Lightning was the Musketeer's biggest hard counter, its decline made made her even safer to play. Musketeer solidified herself as the old reliable in high-level cycle and control decks. She appeared in Giant Mini P.E.K.K.A Beatdown, Expo Siege, Royal Giant Furnace Beatdown, Golem Beatdown, etc. People started seeing Musketeer as a highly versatile card yet again. In the March 2017 meta, the single Musketeer finally hit a plateau in her climb to the top. While she was still a top-tier support card, she lost her momentum because players started shifting toward more specialized air defense and heavier beatdown. Minions and Mega Minion became the new favorites because they were immune to the log, which was the most used card in the entire game at the time. Additionally, the Elixir Collector made a massive comeback, which shifted the spotlight away from the single Musketeer and onto the three Musketeers. The biggest reason why the single Musketeer felt less special was the resurgence of her big sisters. With the Elixir Collector being strong again and the adoption of the new Battle Ram, three Musketeer decks became a dominant force. The Battle Ram was introduced in an era where Lightning was still popular and, by its stats, it was pretty weak. But it made an amazing Lightning Shield for the Musketeers, effectively saving them. This deck right here was the most popular meta deck from this period. Though it never got too crazy since, again, high-cost spells like Fireball, Lightning, and Poison were in almost every top-level deck to deal with those heavier beatdown pushes, the single Musketeer or three Musketeers often got caught in the crossfire, making it a riskier choice than the spell-resistant Knight or the versatile Baby Dragon. By April of 2017, the Musketeer had officially reclaimed her spot as a top-tier staple, climbing all the way to the number 6 spot on the ladder. The resurgence happened because the meta shifted back toward giant beatdown and fast cycle decks, where players started prioritizing Fireball over Lightning to deal with the massive rise in minions and skeletons. Since she was no longer being deleted by Lightning for a negative, she became the reliable bridge in decks like Giant Graveyard, which was extremely popular, and Giant Hog, providing the high-end DPS needed to shred through the Inferno Towers that were popping up to stop those big pushes. Sometimes she was substituted with the Electro Wizard, but I'll talk about that right now. Just as the Musketeer seemed untouchable, she still hit a major identity crisis in mid-2017. The release of the Goblin Gang created a swarm-heavy meta that she struggled to keep up with, and the Electro Wizard began to replace her as the utility support troop of choice. It doesn't stop there either. The introduction of the Night Witch in May of 2017 was probably the biggest shock the game had seen up to that point, and it completely changed the landscape for the Musketeer. The Night Witch was so incredibly broken on release, spawning bats at a ridiculous rate and dealing massive melee damage, that she gave birth to the infamous Bridge Spam and Giant, and most famously, Golem Night Witch metas. For the Musketeer, this was a bit of a good news, bad news situation. On one hand, she was one of the few cards with the range and fire rate to keep up with the endless swarm of bats while staying out of the Night Witch's reach. On the other, the sheer chaos of the Night Witch meant that Lightning and Executioner came roaring back into the meta to clear out the swarms. For Musketeer, this was a chaotic turning point where the lone version of the card began to fade into niche giant decks, while three Musketeers solidified themselves as the absolute strongest win condition on the ladder. The trio became so dominant, usually paired with Battle Ram and Elixir Collector, that air-based decks like Lava Hound and Balloon actually began to flee the meta to avoid being sniped by the constant roaming Musketeers. Ultimately, the lone Musketeer's solo momentum slowed down because she couldn't handle the Night Witch's swarms as effectively as the rising Executioner or Baby Dragon, forcing players to either join the Golem Night Witch Brigade or run the Ladies as a 9 elixir powerhouse to stay competitive. By the end of June 2017, the meta had evolved into the infamous Bridge Spam era, and the Musketeers were right at the center of that chaos. Even though the lone Musketeer had fallen to the very bottom of the priority list, appearing in only a couple of niche giant decks, the three Musketeers were more popular than ever. They actually opened up their clique to include the newest powerhouses, Night Witch and Bandit, who went from 0 to hero practically overnight. This new wave of gameplay focused on overwhelming pressure, using Battle Ram as the top striker to force mistakes. Three Musketeers sat at 24% usage rate while the regular Musketeer was at 4%. Following the Night Witch's reign, the three Musketeers hit a peak in 2017 thanks to the newly introduced heal spell. This created a bit of a frustrating dynamic, aka rock, paper, scissors, where the heal beat poison, which beat fireball, which beat heal. The trio became the most used win condition on the top of the ladder, often paired with Battle Ram and Minion Horde to create overwhelming healing pressure that was nearly impossible to stop without perfect spell response. And while the sisters were thriving, the lone musketeer was mostly seen as a backup in giant minion decks as players shifted toward heavier ground-based control with the rising P.E.K.K.A., which tripled in usage to counter the bridge spam chaos. The dominance of the sisters came to an abrupt end in September when heal was nerfed into near uselessness. Elixir Pump and Battle Ram were also nerfed as well. Without that safety net, the three musketeers saw a drop-off in air raid style decks, clearing the way for Lava Hound and Balloon to return. This month also marked a major shift in the support meta. Zap reclaimed the #1 spot because it was the only way to kill the newly popular bats that the log couldn't reach. The lone musketeer was pushed even further into the background, down to just 2% by the Mega Knight, who dominated his first competitive season and proved far more effective at crushing ground pushes than traditional range troops. And as 2018 began, the Royal Ghost arrived and instantly outclassed the old reliable ground troops like Knight and Bandit. This forced another evolution. Giant Prince and Giant Minor beatdown decks returned to prominence and tried to overwhelm the new legendary heavy control decks. While the three musketeers managed to stay alive and even thrive in specialized beatdown decks, even after a 13% HP nerf to the Elixir Pump in December of 2017, the single musketeer was largely forgotten. If you look at the suggested decks, the Lone Musketeer is almost completely gone, appearing as only a maybe in some Hog Rider or Giant variations. She was essentially a victim of a specialized meta. If players needed air defense, they chose the Mega Minion or Archers. If they needed ground defense, they chose the Knight. If they needed raw damage, they just paid the 9 Elixir for 3 Musketeers. She wasn't a bad card, but in a world of Inferno Dragons and Mega Knights, fair and balanced just wasn't enough to make the cut. As 2018 went on, Musketeer didn't see many opportunities to shine. In April, the arena was being trampled by Giant Double Prince. The Dark Prince was everywhere, and because of his shield and splash damage, he made life very difficult for other support troops. However, the Musketeer's long range allowed her to stay safe while chipping down his shield from across the map, something shorter range troops like the Mini P.E.K.K.A. struggled to do safely. She had small comebacks here and there due to those types of meta changes, but it was still fighting an uphill battle against the Mega Minion, which provided air superiority in over half of all other top decks. Since Fireball was everywhere, used to blast the popular minion hordes, players were still hesitant to rely on Musketeer as their sole air defense. She was becoming a specialist card. If you were a master of positioning and fast cycles, she was your MVP, but for everyone else, the Electro Wizard or Mega Minion were simply safer bets. As the year went on, the game favored more Giant and Minor decks. Fireball was the second most used spell, and Elixir Pumps were getting hit quite a lot, which hurt the Three Musketeers, causing their slow decline. Another new card, the Hunter, took the spotlight. You could shred tanks up close, a job the Musketeer used to perform from a distance. Between the Hunter's burst damage and the Mega Minion's aerial dominance, the Musketeer's niche was kinda shrinking. She was still the queen of range, but she was being forced into a corner where only the most dedicated cycle players could make her shine. The final usage snapshot of 2018, taken in December, paints a stark picture of how a card divided. While we have a gap in the data from May to December, the year-end results show that the Three Musketeers were still a powerhouse, with a 19% usage rate alongside their hardworking partner, the Elixir Collector, and especially in this deck, which essentially was popular all year round. In contrast, the Lone Musketeer was essentially on life support at a measly 4% usage rate. Even more concerning was her 35% win rate, a dismal figure that suggested she wasn't just high skill, but objectively underpowered compared to the newer, flashier support cards. It is worth noting that the Musketeer hadn't received a single balance change since her damage nerf way back in early 2016. Naturally, the Three Musketeers remained untouched as well, since their individual stats are hard-coded to mirror the single card. There was a very specific reason for this balance paralysis. If they buffed the solo Musketeer to help her compete with the new support troops like Electro Wizard, then the Three Musketeers would receive a massive indirect buff that could completely break the game. Conversely, nerfing the trio to rein in their dominance would effectively kill the Lone Musketeer's viability. The link effectively froze her stats in time, forcing her to rely entirely on the shifting meta around her to stay relevant. In February of 2019, Supercell finally made the radical move to decouple the cards, attempting to end the years of balance paralysis. They realized they couldn't help the Lone Musketeer without breaking the game through the trio, so they opted for a two-pronged strategy. They gave the base Musketeer a 3% damage buff, while simultaneously increasing the Three Musketeers' cost to 10 elixir. This was a massive turning point. While 3% sounds tiny, it changed critical math in the arena. Suddenly, the Musketeer could take down a baby dragon, mega minion, or balloon in one fewer shots than before. In a high-speed match, that fraction of a second is the difference between your tower taking 0 damage or being hit by a balloon bomb, and her usage in 2.6 Hog Cycle and Giant decks skyrocketed once again. However, the Three Musketeers essentially broke in a different way. Because of the way the game's elixir bar works, waiting for 10 elixir often caused players to leak a fraction of an elixir just to play the card, making it feel clunky and impossibly risky. The 10 elixir nerf was so severe that the trio's usage plummeted to near 0, leading Supercell to eventually walk it back to 9 elixir and instead use deploy time and staggered placement as the new levers to keep the sisters in check without hurting their solo counterpart. Supercell also introduced the Earthquake spell, which was a direct counter to the elixir pump, which hurt the Three Musketeers beatdown decks even more. Meanwhile, the Lone Musketeer usage shot up from that dismal 4% to nearly 15% within weeks. By April of 2019, the Musketeer had officially reclaimed her throne, successfully pivoting from a niche specialist to the backbone of several diverse meta archetypes. She was the defensive anchor to the classic 2.6 Hog Cycle, where her recent damage buff allowed her to shut down balloons and giants with pinpoint accuracy. In the heavy-hitting Giant Prince beatdown decks, she served as the primary air defense, safely sniping mega minions from behind a meat shield. She even challenged the Electro Wizard for a spot in P.E.K.K.A. bridge spam when players needed raw firepower to melt tanks, and she became a critical component of Fireball bait decks, working alongside Royal Hogs and Flying Machines to overwhelm the opponent's spells. As for the Three Musketeers, they died. To give you an idea of how much of a final boss the Three Musketeers were, their 10 elixir nerf in early 2019 felt like a weight being lifted off the entire community. For years, the meta had been held hostage by the trio. Veteran players essentially had to build every single deck with them in mind, never daring to leave home without a heavy spell like Fireball, Poison, or Lightning. Have a safe day at the arena, baby! Don't forget your lightning! Anyway, while the nerf finally pushed the sisters into a temporary retirement, the relief in the arena was palpable. For the first time in ages, players could experiment with creative, diverse decks without the constant fear of being steamrolled by a 9 elixir firing squad. It opened the door for a much healthier and more colorful meta to grow, proving that while the Three Musketeers were legendary, the game actually became more fun once everyone stopped having to plan for their arrival. Still, it was weird to play the game and see no Three Musketeers at the time. For fans of the Three Musketeers, the move was to play them way back behind the King Tower. That 3-second delay actually became a weird hidden buff for beatdown players because it gave them even more time to build up elixir for a massive push by the time the ladies reached the bridge, though at the same time, it made them more susceptible to being tornadoed and fireballed before they could even move, effectively wasting your 9 elixir while damaging your King Tower. It was now riskier to split the Three Musketeers behind your King Tower because the opponent's tornado could just group them up all back together. I think Supercell did an alright job in balancing them out because a damage nerf to them would hurt the Lone Musketeer again, but to say they were good now would be an overstatement. They were nowhere near as good as before, but they were at least, 10% better. Quite a bunch of off-meta Three Musketeer decks started appearing again in challenges, specifically Fireball bait decks. The Three Musketeers weren't really favored in the competitive meta, and by December of 2019, the competitive landscape had shifted dramatically into a meta defined by high HP, self-sustaining pushes that proved hostile for the Musketeer. While she had peaked earlier in the year, the end-of-the-year snapshots showed the Lone Musketeer falling to a 10% usage rate with a lackluster 48% win rate, while the Three Musketeers languished at a mere 2% usage. This decline was largely driven by the overwhelming dominance of Poison and Night Witch, which sat at the top of the charts. In such an environment, the Musketeer often became collateral damage, frequently caught in the massive poison radii used by players to clear the endless swarms of bats generated by Night Witch. The meta was further complicated by the healing beatdown synergy of the newly released Battle Healer and Elixir Golem. The Musketeer's precise single-target DPS simply couldn't keep up with the waves of area of effect healing that effectively negated her shots. The The Musketeer was squeezed out of her role as a primary defender as other cards proved to be more effective at dealing with the new offense. She remained a stalwart in 2.6 Hog Cycle, but that archetype faced an uphill battle against the infinite value healing compositions that closed out the year. On December 2nd, 2019, Supercell tried to find a middle ground for the three Musketeers by cutting their deploy time down to 2 seconds from 3, and this finally made them usable on defense again, but it came with a twist. The stagger time between each Musketeer appearing was increased to 0.5 seconds, and that created a bit of a staccato-like spawn effect, which helped out a tiny bit, but didn't make the card any more usable. But this was a step in the right direction because Supercell was changing the stats of only the three Musketeers without having to indirectly nerf the single Musketeer. The story of the three Musketeers is a wild ride of give and take that changed how we play Clash Royale. By early 2020, Supercell finally fixed its awkward pop entrance by slashing the stagger time to a snappy 0.1 seconds. This made the trio feel way more responsive and threatening. They were finally bursting onto the field all at once, ready to melt a tank at the bridge or snipe a tower. And for a moment, they were back in the spotlight, even carrying some players to the global top 5. However, the trio's success was tied to the solo Musketeer, who was having a massive superstar moment of her own. Before June of 2020, the single Musketeer was the undisputed queen of support, sitting at a staggering 33% usage rate. She was the safe bet for every pro, a reliable, high-damage sniper who anchored decks like the legendary 2.6 Hog Cycle. But being at the top put a giant target on her back, leading to the October 2020 first hit nerf that slowed her initial attack from 0.5 seconds to 0.8. And that was a total heartbreaker. It basically added a loading bar to her gun, making her stand there staring at enemies like a slowpoke instead of the snappy sharpshooter she used to be. This nerf was intended to balance the solo Musketeer, but it was absolutely devastating for the three Musketeers. They fell off hard until Supercell finally restored their original 1-second deploy time later that year. They had a brief, glorious week of dominance alongside the buffed elite barbarians, but when the E-Barbs got emergency nerfed, the sisters faded into the background. By the time Champions arrived in 2021, the classic Musketeer felt like a vintage relic. Why bring a basic musket to a fight when your opponent has an invisibility cloak or a literal tanky guardian? 2021 was not a good year for either of the cards. Only the true 3M masters were brave enough to bring them into a world where an invisible queen or a dashing knight was waiting around every corner, because they surprisingly still had high win rates above 50%, much more than the normal Musketeer. In 2022, the lone Musketeer regained her efficiency after a long period of feeling sluggish. Supercell gave her a direct hit speed buff, dropping her firing rate from 1.1 seconds to 1.0. This was her first direct attack speed increase, and it significantly improved her defensive utility. What's more, Archer Queen's movement speed was also nerfed. They changed her speed from medium to low, which gave Musketeer a little leeway she needed to shine again. The hit speed buff allowed her to react more quickly to fast-moving threats and effectively compete with the high-impact champions that had previously overshadowed her. She reclaimed her status as a reliable, high DPS support unit, proving that her fundamental design remained a staple of the game. For the three Musketeers, this hit speed buff worked in tandem with a major rework to the elixir collector. The pump was changed to guarantee 1 elixir back upon destruction, which resolved the card's biggest weakness against heavy spells. This created a spell bait dynamic where opponents had to choose between neutralizing the pump or saving their spell for the Musketeers. When paired with the Golden Knight, who cleared ground swarms with his dash ability, the sisters returned to competitive viability and even reached the global top 10. Up until November of 2022, the Musketeers' usage rate sat at a steady 6%. While that might seem low, it was actually a very healthy average for that era, given how many diverse cards and deck combos had been added to the game over the years. However, everything changed in November with the release of the Phoenix and Monk. This duo was so incredibly overpowered that they completely warped the game. The Phoenix's high DPS and rebirth mechanic combined with the Monk's ability to reflect projectiles made it almost impossible to play any traditional support cards, causing the Musketeers' usage and that of almost every other classic troop to plummet. But after the emergency nerfs, her usage rate shot back up to 8%. Nothing special happened in 2023 until June when Supercell announced evolutions. The introduction of card evolutions in June completely shifted the game's power balance. Suddenly, the Musketeer was competing with cards like the evolved Archers and evolved Firecracker, units that cost less elixir but offered massive stat boosts and unique abilities. While the Musketeer remained a balanced and reliable defender, she felt increasingly plain in a meta where opponents could cycle to game-breaking power-ups every 2 deployments. She was still the heart of classic decks like 2.6 Hog, she was still a great alternative to the bummed Archer Queen, and she still held out really well against the evolved cards, especially the evolved Knight, who was really overpowered and overbuffed. Because of this, she managed to maintain her usage rate at around 6 to 8%, though the win rates weren't looking too hot, indicating that she now required more skill to use in the meta. The final blow of the year came in November with the release of the Little Prince. This champion essentially functioned as Musketeer 2.0, offering ramping damage and a slightly longer range for only 3 elixir. The real problem, though, was his Guardian ability. For 2 additional elixir, he could summon a tanky protector that knocked back enemies, effectively giving cycle players a panic button that the classic Musketeer simply couldn't match. And it wasn't just Musketeer, every other card was neglected because of this new brat. He was given away for free after all, so why wouldn't everyone use it? The value was just too good not to. And for the 3 Musketeers, they had a surprisingly good comeback, reviving old giant bridge spam and bait decks that used to be popular back in the early days. You started to see the OG cards back together again, Elixir Pump with 3 Musketeers, Hunter, Minion Horde, Royal Ghost, Battle Ram. In July, we saw a quick resurgence of 3M and Elite Barbarian decks, and E-Barbs were nerfed quickly after, but the deck remained usable, just not meta. It was more obvious than ever that Clash Royale was changed for the good. Evolutions and champions were 2 new rarities and concepts that were going to stay forever, so the game had to evolve, and with it, the Musketeer had to evolve too, unless she wanted to stay dead. For the first half of 2024, she remained in the shadow of the Little Prince, who continued to dominate the support role with his superior versatility. The classic Musketeer was still functional, but in a competitive landscape defined by purple-tinted super units, she often felt like she was bringing a knife to a gunfight. Even though, she has a gun and the other people quite literally just have other forms of knives. However, everything changed in late 2024 on November 4th, when the Musketeer finally received her own evolution, breathing new life into her. This evolution introduced a sniping mechanic, where her range increased and her damage ramped up the further she was from her target, which allowed her to outrange almost every other defensive unit in the game, effectively countering the very evolutions and champions that had previously pushed her out of the meta. And by the end of the year, she wasn't just a niche backup anymore. She had reclaimed her spot as a premier long-range threat, proving that even the oldest legends in the arena can find a way to adapt to a new era. By February of 2025, the evolved Musketeer had successfully carved out a stable place in the competitive landscape, maintaining a 5% usage rate in grand challenges, and while this might seem modest compared to the game's earliest years, it represented the new healthy average for a card in a modern meta feature over God knows how many decks. What's crazy is that she wasn't even truly broken. To keep her in check, Supercell issued 2 precision nerfs to fine-tune her interactions. On February 4th, her first attack speed was slowed from 0.8 to 0.7 seconds to prevent her from locking onto targets too instantly. Later, on March 31st, they followed up with a tiny but necessary adjustment: a 0.5% damage reduction and a 0.06% hit point shave. She was pretty balanced for an evolved card. She wasn't sniping all the time, she could only snipe 3 times, which was enough to defend against any incoming threats and support a new counterattack. And here's where the 2.6 Hog had a big upgrade: the classic cycle, now with a new polished Musketeer with a new musket. Another deck that was revived by the evolution was this Balloon Cycle deck, which fell out of use because it simply had no good evolutions to go along with it in the new reality. She excelled at sniping defensive units like Inferno Dragons or Wizards from a safe distance, effectively clearing a path for the balloon to connect with the tower. This created a powerful synergy where the balloon baited out the opponent's air counters, which the Musketeer then eliminated to maintain constant offensive pressure. By forcing the opponent to deplete their elixir on these threats, the deck opens up opportunities for reliable chip damage with the Miner and Snowball, all while the Musketeer provides robust defense and utility through King Tower activations. Soon enough, Musketeer would get an upgrade that the game had never seen before. By late 2025, it was more obvious than ever that Clash Royale was changing for good. Evolutions and champions had become permanent fixtures in the game, and the meta had shifted toward high-impact, ability-driven gameplay. So Supercell decided to add a new concept, Heroes, in December of 2025, a system that allowed classic cards to ascend into leaders with powerful, manually activated abilities. As one of the 3 initial heroes released on December 1st, the hero Musketeer retained her base stats but gained a massive strategic edge through her new ability, the Trusty Turret. For 3 elixir, she can deploy a short-range auto turret 3 tiles in front of her, providing an immediate defensive barrier that deals 204 area damage upon landing, just enough to instantly clear swarms like goblins and skeletons. The Trusty Turret is a high-risk, high-reward building with a massive 350 DPS, a 161% increase over the Musketeer's own damage output, but it only lasts for 10 seconds. This brief lifetime forces players to use the ability reactively, making her a formidable counter to tanks and rapid-fire pushes rather than long-term defensive structure. Unlike the evolved Musketeer, which focuses on long-range sniping, the hero version is a master of area denial. They pretty much added more offense to this support card. This feature, of course, sparked intense debate in the community, where players argued over whether she had become too powerful, and many players compared her turret to a mini Expo on defense, while others criticized the hero fragment system required to unlock her, fearing that the game was leaning too heavily into a pay-to-win model. Oh, come on guys, Supercell's never done that before. Ever since day 1, she was already paired with the hero Knight, and that is literally it. It's a cycle deck. Just these 2 cards are now enough to win you games. If you ask me, we've already done enough videos about the path Supercell is going down. Heroes like this are the last feature people were expecting, especially after the community's most favorite and most requested best update ever, King Level 16! Seriously, the game has too many issues, gameplay and business-wise. I like the idea, and her design looks really cool, the gold really fits her, but again, this was the last of our concerns. Well, despite all that controversy, the hero Musketeer did successfully modernize the card for 2026 by offering a completely different playstyle from her evolution. Players found that while the evolution was better suited for supporting a balloon miner push by sniping buildings from a distance, the hero form was just the superior choice for beatdown decks that needed a heavy-duty defensive anchor. Now, just the hero Musketeer is enough to shut down an incoming Hog Rider or any win condition, even a Golem by herself, and help from the Princess Tower. She and her cannon literally shred anything. However, it is still possible to defend against her. Thankfully, she's a real great spell value. Defended right, she's just a wasted 7 elixir, which is nuts, and probably the reason why Supercell hasn't issued a nerf to her just yet. By the end of 2025, Musketeer had transformed from a simple starter troop into a multifaceted legend. Whether she was sniping enemies from across the arena or deploying turrets to melt golems, she proved that even a card from 2016 could lead the charge in the most complex era of Clash Royale history. In January of 2026, the classic Lone Musketeer is feeling the heat, sitting at a 2% usage rate. It's a bit low for her, mostly because the new Hero Musketeer is stealing the show with an 8% usage rate, and players are clearly loving the new Trusty Turret ability, which has pushed her slightly above the new meta average. As for the decks though, all of the aforementioned decks are still being used, just with the new Hero Musketeer. 2.6 Hog Cycle is still the king of the ladder with a huge 7.1% usage rate, and Balloon Cycle is just right behind it at 6.62%. As for the 3 Musketeers, they're finally having a good time again, usually seen paired with Royal Hogs and Royal Ghost to keep the pressure high in both lanes. And thus, this concludes our Musketeers journey as of January 2026. Personally, Musketeer is one of my favorite cards in the entire game, not because I play 2.6 Hog, of course. She has been extremely versatile and reliable in any deck she was thrown into as a ranged attacker. Her boomstick is dangerous to mess around with. And fun fact, the 3 Musketeers card is a direct reference to the famous novel The Three Musketeers by the French author Alexandre Dumas. If you've read that novel, you know that they were actually 4 Musketeers: Athos, Porthos, Aramis, and D'Artagnan, who was never considered to be in the group. Clash Royale also has 4 Musketeers, and one of them isn't in the group. A pretty neat reference. Another interesting fact regarding the Lone Musketeer is that before she was released in the game, her damage was decreased by 14%, which is actually a pretty big nerf, done for the best. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, I recommend watching the worst cards for every rarity in Clash Royale, so you never upgrade them and waste your resources. I'll see you there.
you.